Hello everyone, it's Kevin Williams along with Matt Manley, our senior basketball editor for Shore Sports Network, and we're getting you set for the 35th annual WOBM Christmas Classic. The boys division begins play on Sunday at the RWJ Barnabas Health Arena in Toms River, and that's what Matt and I will focus on in this segment. And Matt, with no surprise, Manasquan, who won the tournament last year, was the unanimous top seed going into this year's tournament. Warriors have looked pretty impressive earlier. Is this Manasquan's tournament to lose?
Yeah, I would say so. They're probably going to be, I don't want to speak for another publication, but they'll probably be a top 20 team in the state. They just beat a top 20 team in the state in Union Catholic on Saturday in a high-scoring game. They were really impressive in the second half against Rumson, and then opened up against Raritan. They were given the seed before any of that happened, but I think these last three games have just been an affirmation of what we kind of knew about them. They're big. They've got some pretty good guard play that was unproven, but I think everybody knew that it was talented enough to complement a bunch of big guys and long players that are going to make them really tough to beat. And there's a little bit of inexperience or an unproven element to the rest of the field. It's a pretty talented field, but there's a little bit of an unproven element to the rest of it that Manasquan has covered a little bit better, that I think everybody looked at the roster and said, well, this is the team to beat.
Yeah. Squan returns Brad McCabe, who was the MVP last year when they beat Toms River North in the championship game. But I think it's the other two returning players, the two forwards, and when they walked into the breakfast the other day, I mean, the size of them really stood out, and I think some of the other teams kind of looked, boy, they're that big, but those guys, and they've gotten good play for them earlier.
Yeah, the front court there is really good. It's always a good rebounding team. Like, even when they're kind of guard-oriented in their scoring, they always have the big guys across the board who just get after it on the glass. And this team has that, but you look at Alex Galvan, who he played as a sophomore last year, came off the bench for most of the year, was good for them as a sophomore. He got hurt, so it kind of stagnated his season a little bit, but he's been a monster this year. He got in first half foul trouble against Rumson. That's the only reason he hasn't scored 20 points every game. Yeah. He dominated against Union Catholic, and he's looked great early on. And Xander Korlick, he's been a steady guy up front for them, and those have been their two front court guys. And McCabe, you know, he's kind of that swing man on offense, but he's a great rebounder. He's been a great rebounder for 3 years for them now. As a sophomore, he was a guy going up on the glass. So they've got all kinds of size and length, and it's just really hard to get second shots and to keep them off the offensive glass, and you've seen that play out a lot over the first 3 games.
Yeah, the key for them going into this year maybe was how to replace Ryan Flanagan, the point guard from last year. Kind of ran the show.
Yeah.
Was a guy who didn't need to score a lot of points, but sort of controlled the ball, and I guess so far that's been okay.
Yeah, and all due respect to McCabe, I thought he was their engine in the OBM and in a lot of games last year. He was huge for them, and replacing him was going to be tough, but they've had some guys to do it. Kieran, his younger brother, has been playing well. They have a sophomore named Casey Mulligan, and the headliner for a lot of people is Ben Roy, who's a freshman who every coach who's seen him loves him. And when you watch him, you can see why. He's just got a great feel for the game. He can shoot it. He knows how to run a team as a freshman. He just does all the little things at a young age that are going to play up as the season and certainly as his career goes on. But that backcourt has played really well for them, and it's only 3 games into the season, and you're already kind of looking at that backcourt like it's young, but they're fine there, and then they've got the big boys up front. So it's going to be fun to watch them develop, and it's going to be really hard to beat them in this tournament.
Early going, you might question the seeding, which was done by the coaches themselves, and only a few days before the season began. So it's not like we did this back on Thanksgiving, the Sunday before the season opened, and the coaches seeded. But it's funny, Manasquan opens up Sunday night in the last game of the day. They play Toms River South, who's the 16th seed, and is off to a 2-0 start.
Yeah, and we were probably walking on thin ice with some of the lower seeds because a lot of it's going to be based on last year and the records. Yep. But Toms River South brought a lot back from last year. They graduated a few seniors, but a lot of the guys who really contributed at the end of the year were some of that sophomore group. And it's always hard to really pinpoint whether, you know, if a team lost a lot of games the year before, is it a good thing they're bringing everybody back? Yeah. Because then the question is, do those guys develop and become better, or is it just not a great group? And I think with Toms River South, at least 2 games into the season, you're seeing that this team just needed some time to develop, because the junior class that they have leading the way this year is 2-0. They got a nice win opening night against Southern, and then they turned some heads by beating a Central team that's also young and trying to figure some things out. But they went to Central against a team that's ranked in our top 10, maybe not for long, but the start of the season.
Yeah.
And they get a big win there. So they're 2-0. As we record this, they're getting ready to play Toms River North on Thursday, so we'll see what they're made of there. But either way, they're not playing like the 16th seed in this tournament. I think if you're reseeding it, obviously they're looking a little better than that.
Toms River North is the 2nd seed. The Mariners have had a lot of success in this tournament, which happens to be played on their home court the last few years, winning it, getting into the finals. They replace a lot from last year. I know they have some size. They're off to a pretty good start. I would think they're a little bit of a shaky number 2, maybe 2, 3, and 4, 5. You know, those teams could almost go anywhere. At least that's what I thought.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I think it's all relative. The good thing about them is Rory Caswell works in the depth over the course of the season. So if the bench is a little bit sophomore and junior heavy, they're getting some experience in game, and they're ready to go next year. And I think that's kind of how it's playing out. Like Najee Hallenbeck started as the season went on last year. Jakari Spence got some starts at the end of last year. So those guys know what they're doing within the framework of Toms River North style. And same with like Nick Dunsack, who got in the game and has a little bit more of an expanded role this year. And, you know, their starting lineup is pretty solid. And again, they're going to work some depth into the mix this year, and it's going to be a similar Toms River North team in that regard. It's hard to say whether or not they're going to be as good, better. I think, you know, talking to Caswell, he's optimistic that they'll be where they've been. But at this point, they're still a little bit inexperienced, and maybe they're a little bit shaky footing as a number 2 seed relative to Manasquan.
Right.
But I think relative to the rest of the field, looking at the rest of it, I think it's pretty safe to put them number 2 with some other teams possibly in that mix.
Mariners will open up with Manchester on Sunday in the opening round. One thing they've also done, though, is these kids have learned what it's like to win. They've won a lot of games these last few years. I mean, by far the most successful program in Ocean County, and have played with some of the big boys in Monmouth County pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. They opened up against St. Augustine, who's been the South Jersey non-public A powerhouse the last couple of years.
Yeah.
That's probably going to be a pretty wide open bracket, which I'm sure we'll talk about over the course of the year. But they opened up with them, and they played it pretty competitively. They did lose 70-63, but you know, St. Augustine's a team that went up in scrimmage Ranny and competed with them for a quarter or two. And, you know, so to go play St. Augustine tough is a pretty good accomplishment. You'd like to win, and that's what Caswell said after they beat Brick the other night, is we would have liked to open with a win, but we were pretty happy with the way we played that game. And then, you know, they played a really good defensive game against Brick the other night, kept it rolling in A South, and I would expect that they're still very, very much the team to beat in A South, despite the fact that some other teams have more experience back from last year. Usually
the 3-14 game is one you would expect to be somewhat one-sided. Freehold Township is the 3. They're an example of what you mentioned, a team, they were under 500 last year, and Brian Golub has had a lot of success. They played well in this tournament, but they brought everyone back, so there's going to be high expectations. And they take on Brick Memorial, a 14th seed, who's gotten off to a pretty good start under Coach Mike Pelkey.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, last year they beat Freehold Township.
I think you're right,
and you know, I remember looking when this bracket came out, and I said, it's not happening again this year. Last year was a total anomaly for Freehold Township. They were in a sectional final 3 years in a row prior to last year. They only brought back one starter from the year before last year, so they were very inexperienced, and that one starter, Greg Billups, got hurt. So you had a completely inexperienced team with them last year. They got better over the course of the year. They started working some of those inexperienced guys in. They produced, and now they bring back a little bit more guard-oriented team than they had going back for those 3 years when they were in sectional finals. But a deep team, as they usually are, they can still get out and pressure you and run and jump. And they've got a couple guys who can beat you in a few different ways. So I think they're a pretty safe bet to pencil into the next round. But like you said, Brick Memorial's 2-0 to open the season. They beat Central on opening night. We think that's a pretty good win at this point, even though Central's 0-2. And, you know, then they went and had a convincing win over Jackson Memorial, who also was a team that I think looked better on paper this year. And there's reason to believe they're going to be way better than the 3-19 season they had last year. So to win those 2 games for Brick Memorial with a lot of new guys themselves, they have a couple really good players back, but they did lose a pretty good group of seniors. So good start for them, and you have to keep an eye on them even against the good Freehold Township team in round 1. Yeah.
Rounding out the top 4 seeds is Central Regional. You've mentioned them a couple times already because they're off to a rather disappointing start. A lot of expectations, some young guys and some returning players. I think the thought was this was a team that was really ready to take the next step. And certainly they may well. We're so early in the season. But they open up with Donovan Catholic on Sunday, a team they've had a pretty good rivalry over the years. And I guess for a 4-13, you got to keep your eye on this one.
Yeah, and I think if you're just looking at what's played out so far, you might even call Central the underdog in that game. Because Donovan Catholic, Pinelands is going to have a very good year in B-South this year. They're very experienced. They just had, they just put a hurting on Manchester after Manchester beat Lacey on opening night. And Donovan Catholic had them down to the wire on opening night, Pinelands that is. So they probably should be feeling a little bit more encouraged about their start than Central does. And going into that game, I think it's kind of a toss-up. They have a pretty good freshman of their own on the Donovan Catholic side, so I wouldn't say just because Central's young and talented doesn't mean Donovan doesn't have that element too. That's going to be a tough one. And with Central, this is a lot on their plate early. They were 8-18 last year.
Yep.
They had one big win over Point Beach, and the rest of the year was just trying to figure out how to replace a really good team. And this year, it's working 2 really good young players into the fold with a group that should be improved, but it's like, how do you balance these talented new kids with a group of seniors who are good, but they need the help, the infusion of talent? And it's going to be a process that maybe we see play out in the course of this tournament. Maybe this is when they figure it out. But early on you're seeing it's not that easy to just go from like an 8-win season to top 10 in the Shore just by throwing in a really good sophomore like Kyle Roden. Yeah.
All right, so if you take those top 4 seeds and you look at the next 4, number 5 is Marlboro, number 6 is Red Bank Catholic, 7 is Middletown South, and rounding out the top 8 would be Lacey. Give me one of those teams that could make a run here that you think.
Absolutely RBC, 100%. The only reason they're a 6 seed, in my opinion, is because they're all football players and they're all throwing up bricks in the preseason. They're all shooting it like with their lats swollen. So over the course of the season, that's going to be a top. Because when I first laid out the teams, I thought they might be a top 5 team in the Shore, but I think it might take a little bit of time. They played another team that played Randy Good for a quarter. I don't know what that means. Eventually you're probably going to feel it against them. But they have some really good players who are also football kids who are going to take some time to blend together. And I kind of liked what I saw from them in the preseason, even though they didn't play great. So I think over time they're going to be a really good team within the framework of the Shore Conference. And it's just a matter of is the extra week to 10 days that they've had since like opening night, is that enough to get them playing as well as they would need to knock somebody off? And when you're 6 seed, that means they won't play Manasquan until the final. So like you said, Toms River North isn't so far ahead of everybody else as the 2.
Right.
So if you're sitting at a 6 or a 7 or a 3, you got to figure, look, we got a great shot to get to the final of this tournament. I think RBCs would have to be the team to watch if they can, shake off some of the rust from football season.
Point Borough in the opening round, and assuming they win, likely Freehold Township in the quarterfinals. That could be a real good quarterfinal.
Yeah, that's a very good game, and it's a bunch of it's going to be a bunch of big guys on RBC against a more guard-oriented Freehold Township team who always plays tougher and bigger than they are, regardless of what size they have. But yeah, no, that would be one of the better ones you're going to find. And I think with I think 6 of the teams I had in the top 10 to open the year. So, if Central can figure things out, you're going to have 6 ranked quality teams that are playing in this field.
But I don't think there's any doubt in summing it up. Manasquan is clearly the class of this field right now.
Yeah, I think that's what we all thought going into it, and they haven't done anything to change that perspective, and they might have even enhanced that position a little bit with the way they played first 3 games of the season. They got a pretty tough deal to have to go play at Raritan, who's senior heavy and physical, handled them, and then they beat a really good Union Catholic team and handled Rumson. That's about as well as you can start a season, and they're obviously number 1 for a reason.
Well, the WOBM Christmas Classic, the boys division opens up on Sunday. 8 games starting 10 o'clock in the morning. The last game might be a midnight madness version.
Yeah.
That's Manasquan and Toms River South. Scheduled for 9 o'clock. we'll just give you a hint. There's no way that game starts at 9. The girls' play begins on Saturday. You can get all the matchups, the brackets at shoresportsnetwork.com. And of course, you can follow Matt not only for the boys' coverage of the Christmas Classic, but all throughout the season, Shore Conference basketball. Matt, thanks for joining us.
All right, Kev.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everyone. Hope to see you at the 35th Annual WOBM Christmas Classic at the RWJ Barnabas Health Arena.